Hi there. I am David Agus. I'm a professor of medicine and engineering at the University of Southern California. And together with the forum, we welcome you and congratulate you for surviving till 2 o'clock on a Friday. And we hope to keep your energy up with this session. And I think when you hear the content and the depth of the speakers around it, I think you'll all get very excited too. So we're at a transition point in our field. We're starting to see the outpatient side where no longer are doctors the collector of data. The patient is becoming the collector of their own data. Patients are checking their blood pressure, going in with 3 months of a supply. They have their movement. Pretty soon they're going to prick their finger and send in a biochip to the doctor. So the doctor's office visit can actually be something we all dreamed about, which is actually talking to the patient rather than collecting data. The inpatient, the hospital side, is always slower to respond, but obviously critical. Most people experience hospital stays at critical events in their life, acute stays. When you're born, when you have a child, when you get acutely ill. I will tell you, most of my patients are never hospitalized. So from when they're diagnosed with a cancer to if they fail the cancer and ultimately die, many times they're never hospitalized. That being said, surgical procedures, something we all go through, and the hospitals hopefully are going to change. And I think you'll hear perspectives here that gives you a whole new framework for the power of what a hospital could be and will be and probably should be. So I first want to introduce the panelists because you know their perspectives, because classic forum style, it's a very broad range of people from all different disciplines, and I think each bring a unique perspective. So starting on my left is Thomas DeRosa, who is the CEO of Welltower, and I'll let him tell a little bit about himself.
So Welltower is a $40 billion public company that is the largest platform in senior care. We own over 1,400 buildings in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. But we also treat and care for 250,000 frail to demented elderly, generally 85 and up, at any given moment in any day. Our other business is what we call outpatient medical. We own 16 million square feet of outpatient medical buildings throughout the United States. What we don't own is a hospital, and we'll talk more about that later.
Going around in a clockwise fashion, Shamshir Vayalil is the Managing Director of VPS Healthcare, which is based in the UAE.
Thank you, David. I'm a radiologist by training. When I started to work, I realized that I should not be confined to the basements of hospitals. And I was born into a business family, so blood was into business. So I wanted to start one hospital. So the first hospital I started in Abu Dhabi, and then that was 9 years back. Now we see almost 12,000 patients a day, and we do only hospitals. So we have hospitals, the clinics, manufacturing facilities. So we believe in an integrated model. And we feel that hospitals have changed. And I feel that in the next 10 years, you would see changes what you would not have seen in the last 100 years. So we're
Great.
excited.
Well, we're excited to hear what you think those are in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Next, clockwise, is Sean Duffy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Omada Health in the U.S.
Yes, I'm Sean. So Omada, you can think of, funnily enough, almost like a digital hospital for participants and patients who are at high risk of diseases like diabetes, thanks to obesity. Where the in-person programs that have shown to be effective clinically are just hard to get to. The research shows that you can make a big difference if you catch people right before they tip into chronic diseases like diabetes, but it requires multiple touch points, weekly sessions, lots of in-person visits, social support. So we've architected those same principles, but online. We match people into groups, bring them on a curriculum, mail them hardware, and just make it so that we come to them where they are, and people tend to live their lives in front of their screens, so we figure that's where we should capture them and help them. And we've, over the past 5 years, become actually the biggest provider of these digital interventions in the U.S., and we are still just getting started, which tells you how far there is to go in the healthcare system in the country.
That's great. Next is Betsy Nabel, who is one of the greats in the field of cardiology, who had a leadership position at the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, NHLBI, and now leads one of the premier medical institutions, Brigham and Women's, in Boston.
Thank you, David. I probably represent the academic integrated health delivery system among the panelists here. I would say that we, like other academic centers, provide 4 functions. We provide exceptional care to our patients, from prevention to acute illness to post-hospitalization. We engage in innovation and discovery through our research programs. We educate the next generation of medical and scientific leaders, and we serve our community locally and globally. And I will argue that those 4 functions can be served regardless of the structure.
All right. And last, we have Sarah Doherty, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer of, this is the longest word we have on our sheet here, telehealth robotics.
Well, we firmly believe that the title of a business should tell you a lot about what it does, and that's exactly what telehealth robotics does. We build and pair remote technology to enable healthcare services around the world. So we have a software system that a healthcare provider can log into anywhere in the world. They can interact with a patient remotely to do telepresence, and then they can also use the controls of the software, like a video game, to guide a robotic kiosk that can be dropped anywhere in the world to provide services like remote ultrasound, eventually remote primary care, ear, nose, and throat exam, and a range of other diagnostic services. So talked a little bit about behavioral health-wise, bringing the hospital to everyone, and we'd like to do that with hardware and diagnostic services. So break through that computer screen, that phone to allow for actual sort of physical exam wherever a patient is. So whether that's a long-term care facility, a prison, a hospital that wants to, through an integrated delivery network, better labor resource share, a remote island like we were talking about before, a lot of applications for delivering care that is for the right patient at the right time at the right cost.
So as you see, we got very different backgrounds. We're seeing these trends in hospitals right now. I have 2 patients today that are undergoing prostatectomies at our hospital, and they're outpatient. So they're going home after the prostatectomy, which 10 years ago, that was a 5 to 7 day stay at minimum. And we're seeing that transition. At the same time, obviously, we're still seeing lots of dollars being poured into hospitals. So let's start with an open-ended question. 10 years from now, so in 2027, where are we going to be? I mean, so when I go into a major city, so let's right now talk about major cities. So a major city in a developed country, I go into a hospital in 10 years, what's it going to be like?
I think it's going to be very different from what you see today. Think about, I'll take you to New York City. My 2 eldest daughters were born in the same hospital, in the same wing, on the same floor as their great-grandfather 100 years earlier.
Wow.
And if I wanted to take them to see that hospital today, they would be looking at one of the new luxury condominium buildings that has been developed in the West Village of New York City. And that hospital was St. Vincent's Hospital. And St. Vincent's Hospital was on the front line of the AIDS epidemic back in the late 80s. And its physical plant could just not deliver modern medicine today. I recently met with the CEO of a major hospital in a major city in the United States. And he said to me, just so you know, you can't get a Wi-Fi signal in 60% of this building. How do we deliver modern medicine when you can't get a Wi-Fi signal? So I think the world is changing. 10 years, we're going to look very different.
I think 10 years from now, you won't see standalone hospitals, according to me. I think it would become part of life. You would have people walking into a hospital, drinking coffee, having business meetings, doing their gyms. Their iPhones would be their primary doctors. They would have their data connected on to a central artificial intelligence kind of a stuff. They would be getting continuous advice. So I think even today, if you take prostatectomy, which you were talking about, it's all done by robots. And you have the skills, the doctor stays, but I think the dependence on artificial intelligence and data is going to be much larger. So I think there'll be a complete shift. There will be democratization of healthcare. You would have people in the center, not the physicians or the hospitals. So I think we are here for some exciting times.
So you asked, 10 years you walk into a hospital, what's that experience like? And I think you've got to ask also why you're there and what you're there for. And I think 10 years from now, you're going to be walking for something very specific. And you might need a hernia surgery. And the hospital is maybe not that large, but that is just what they do. They do hernia surgeries. And how you got there was a digital mostly experience where you maybe felt some pain, you open up your phone, you view that experience as primary care. You file a ticket, it gets routed, maybe you get some diagnostics at a small center that collects any physical specimens that you need, that's routed. Maybe you see someone and then you're sent to this hospital. And I think all the data systems
So you're
will be
saying
connected.
verticals.
I think that's where it's going to go. I think it's going to be special in urban centers, specialist verticals where volume matters for outcomes.
That's great.
I would reframe the question as well and ask, in 10 years, why do you think you need to go to a hospital?
Uh-huh.
And I would redefine a hospital as a center where an individual is likely to undergo some type of invasive procedure for which they might need an extended period of continuous monitoring. And that is best served by having a group of experts who can provide that monitoring. And so it may be a vertical
Right.
care center, as you've defined it. But where we would like to take our health delivery system is as much into the home and into the community as possible,
Why?
because we think we can deliver better care at lower costs. If you believe in value-based healthcare,
Right.
the definition being outcomes, patient-measured outcomes, not process outcomes, but patient-measured outcomes defined by cost. We believe that outcomes will be better delivered at home in the community at much lower cost.
That's great.
So I'd take you up on your why question also, and my answer would be that the very name of a hospital creates a huge issue in healthcare, right? Largely because people think that's the only place you go to get healthcare and to think about your health, and they only think about their health when they're going there, right? So there are so many solutions already out there in the market, like Omada, like others, that allow you to take charge of your health in your home. But we have a kind of technology gap, an education gap around those tools that are available. My opinion is that I think we're no longer going to have hospitals. We're going to have points of care. Whether it's in your home, it's your local community center, it's your pharmacy, it's your school or your workplace, and that's kind of core to the technology we're building, that it's, kind of drop clinic. You do see a lot of clinics now that are on your street corner, but the limitation that they have, similar to the limitation of a hospital that you go to, is that they're only available the people who have expertise that are stationed there. And so what we think is that they're having a virtual pool of providers who are available to each point of care, whether it's at your home through your phone or at your local community center through a kiosk like telehealth robotics. You have this pool of physicians who work across the country and across the world, and you can get availability from a cardiologist and then an endocrinologist and then a nurse practitioner to manage your chronic disease, one right after the other. So I would say not only are we going to change from the physicality of hospitals, but we're also going to change from the localization of physicians to a particular hospital, instead having physicians share their expertise around the world.
So, Sarah, in your distributed model of labor, how do you ensure quality?
That's a good question. So, I think initially we're working on partnering with leading institutions to share that labor resource. And, we'll still have to go through the same qualification that physicians go through now, right, in working with leading academic medical institutions. I think as we look more towards commoditizing the practice of medicine, that will become a big issue, and we'll have to think a lot from a regulatory standpoint and also from an education standpoint, how we make sure that we have sort of equal quality of care across that network.
Betsy, now you're in a hospital, one of the best in the country, that's considered really, not exclusively, but a tertiary care hospital. The craziest, hardest cases are sent to you. In your model of the future, are you going to be much more primary care in not just Boston, but spreading out, or are you refining in one area?
Yeah. We are going to be both. We certainly are going to be very much primary care, but we also will remain tertiary care. And when I say we, I want to include Brigham and Women's Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital. We're Partners Healthcare System. We are 60% referral, primarily regional, but national and international as well. But having said that, we believe very strongly in the power of the personal relationship between an individual and their healthcare provider to deliver good health, to provide outstanding outcomes, and to build a lifelong relationship that will foster health and wellness. I want to commend an article that appeared in the New Yorker this week by Atul Gawande, who is a surgeon at our hospital. And he talks about, as a surgeon, he was trained to cure people, episodic, one-time cure. But as he has stood back, he's realized that most improvements in health and wellness occur through incremental medicine. And he gives several examples in this article and talks very eloquently that our future is really about the relationship that we have with healthcare providers. So I believe very strongly in digital technology as important tools that we will utilize, that they will overlay on our electronic medical record to help healthcare providers better deliver their care. But I'd love to hear the two of you talk about what's the role of the relationship with the healthcare provider.
Yeah. I'll just say, I'm listening to you talk, and I would talk to Atul Gawande when he was here yesterday in this same circle, and we were talking about work he's doing in Estonia related to community healthcare workers. And I said to him, what's the role of telemedicine? Because a big part of the work they're doing is relationship focused. And, I think that that's an important part of this, and in some ways we'll be able to better enable physicians and patients to connect, because hopefully that physician will be freed up by the artificial intelligence and the better use of their bandwidth to connect with patients who want to connect with the same person each time. So instead of, having to wait because someone's late or someone cancels, you can connect in, maybe to a patient that you've seen before who is waiting to see you. But the alternative side of that is there's so many people without access. And I think, that's sort of the baseline. It's great to have that relationship, and you do see impact that comes from that. But below that, we have all these people who are not able to get access to care. And so I think that's probably, for me, the problem that we have to solve first is access and then relationship building.
Yeah, so you're developing a system that, in a sense, is data-driven, has outcomes, but the reliance on the physician is less than many healthcare systems.
We always call it high tech and high touch, because I do not think we could get any clinical outcomes in our program without people as part of the system. I mean, we match people into groups, social relationships, feeling loved, supported, like you're not alone. As you go through this change is critical. Having a coach, kind of providing oversight, accountability, motivation is critical. And I do think, I completely agree with you, I think the brand affinity, the relationship that folks will have with whatever the system, whatever their view of primary care is tomorrow will be critical. And we're almost like a specialty center where we'd be referred, a practitioner would say, hey, you're at risk for diabetes, there's this program, and route through the EMR to Amada, and then we feed data back. The only area where I might imagine a world that could be different than what it is today is, I think, right now, when people talk about that emotional feel with healthcare that can deliver on outcomes, they tend to think of that as a person. And I actually think that tomorrow's world, it's going to be a brand. You're going to grow incredible trust with a brand and a system. And all the associated people will be able to know you in context of that brand in a way that makes them feel like, part of your team. And that is how you'll view kind of your locus of care, in my opinion.
And I would add to that, because the concept of brand today, if you want to access the Brigham and Women's brand, you need to live in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. I foresee a day where someone who lives in Chicago who wants to affiliate with Brigham and Women's can do that, and do that on a local basis. We may see it in the future, a Brigham and Women's ambulatory care outpatient medical facility in Chicago. But today,
So
if
what
you
is the
wanted
brand, though? What the brand is a style of medicine?
The brand
it's a treatment algorithm?
is the quality of care. Mm-hmm. It's the reliability, the dependability, the trust, that if you touch Brigham and Women's Hospital, actually, Tom, you are prescient, because just this week, we are relaunching ourselves as Brigham Health, because we believe very strongly in focusing on health and wellness. We maintain and restore health. And wherever you touch us around the world, you can receive that same reliable, dependable, high quality of care.
No more women?
We're keeping the hospital name locally because we've had so many babies born at our hospital. In fact, Sarah said you were born. We will never give that up.
But
this
if you
expansion-
hire a
but
new
it's-
doctor, I mean, do they
Yeah.
go on a computer and say, here's how the Brigham and Women doctors treat X disease? What is the brand?
The brand is the apprenticeship, that a trainee comes and gets embedded in the secret sauce of dedicated teaching. And I'm looking at Dr. Jeff Drazen, who was one of my teachers when I was a house officer. That has gone on for over 100 years.
So it's not treatment pathways.
It is a value system that says, as a healthcare provider, whether you're a physician, a nurse, a social worker, a pharmacist, this is
It's a
a
culture.
value. It's a culture. It's a value system, and those values are then embedded, linked with standards of care that are best practices, that are evidence-based, and have been shown to produce exceptional patient outcomes at a low cost, at the lowest cost possible.
Great.
But I have a
And-
different, I have a
Yeah.
different view on this. In healthcare, we always talk about two things, quality and safety. I think it's a kind of oversell because that has become part of the game. There is nothing which goes without quality and safety. But what is the value coming with it? Because today we have a problem. The cost is going up and the value is coming down. And that's only happening in healthcare. You take manufacturing. There's always the profitability which increases with the fourth industrial revolution. But here, the hospital operating margins are coming down. It's almost reached 6 to 7%. You go for a IT implementation, even I believe partners ended up in a loss with their new installations. MD Anderson laid off 900 people. We have tried affiliates from our part of the world. We have tried multiple partners, but there is no standardization. We couldn't live with any partner for more than 2 or 3 years because what happens in US doesn't apply to the Middle East or Africa. So I think we need to look at it from a global perspective, look at it as a universal health record rather than sub-focusing on one recipe which nobody knows. I don't think you can explain what is your secret of your success, not your from the 100 years. So I think we need to value what it is. We need to see what is the recipe. We need to do data analysis, why somebody coming out of Brigham is 10 times better than coming from somewhere else. So I think
Well, that's what I'm trying to push at. I mean, how do you be iterative and data-driven
Yeah.
if it's a secret sauce?
Well, can I?
Well,
Yeah.
I want to clarify, because I would say, Sarah, that the secret sauce may be applicable to our region in the United States, but that's a
right.
geographic
Yeah,
region. Your secret sauce is going to be very different,
yes,
because it's going to be culturally
that's right.
dependent.
Yes,
The degree to which we can partner together
that's right.
and share our secret sauces and figure out where the commonalities are and respect our differences.
That's right.
To me, that's the opportunity.
That's right. I think
One other thing I'd add to the brand question, for hospitals that approach us and are interested in working with technologies like ours, their brand focus is actually on innovation. So how can you show your patient population that you're at the cutting edge in terms of optionality from a treatment perspective, reinventing medicine and treatment plans? And I think that, for businesses like ours, that will be a big part of why people come, right? They're interested in different ways to approach their healthcare, and also why we might partner with health systems to get a prescription, essentially. So, maybe you need chronic care management, or maybe you need chronic ultrasounds, right? Because you just had a procedure and you need follow-up care. How do we kind of work with hospital systems to focus in on that component of brands, which I think now, as technology becomes more and more important in attracting patients and differentiating yourself in a metropolitan area from other hospitals, we see that as really driving a lot of hospital sort of brand focus.
So brand focus based on technology, not just on the secret sauce and the culture.
Well, I think they're sort of integrating that into their secret sauce, right? So we also see a lot of trainees that kind of work with us in some of our clinical trials, And they're being encouraged to think in an innovative way about the treatment plans that could be delivered, not saying no right away to a disease state that traditionally couldn't have been treated, and also giving optionality for the way that you might approach your healthcare and your follow-up from a hospital visit, right? So, we were talking with people from Kaiser Permanente, and they said that 50% of the people that they work with opted into a telemedicine visit, right? So if you are able to provide a lot of ways that people can interact with your healthcare system, I think that's starting to be a big part of marketing opportunity for hospitals from a brand perspective.
We're talking about healthcare like a consumer product. And I think that's very interesting because traditionally healthcare has, I think, at least in the US, been thought of as an entitlement, not necessarily a consumer choice. You went to wherever you were told to go. And that made, I think what you're hearing today is really changing.
It's much more obviously targeted to bigger cities where there's a lot of
Yes.
choice. But you have a business model that basically your business model is stay away from them.
Exactly.
And so it's a very interesting dynamic, right? Your goal is to keep the patients out from their hospitals.
Exactly.
And it's working.
It is
obviously.
working. We take what is the most at-risk population for the Brigham, the 85 and up, frail to demented. That is, they are the largest consumers of acute care. And Betsy used a word that I always use, it's wellness. So what is it that we do? We provide wellness to this population. What is that? That is nutrition, it's hydration, it's physical mobility, it's socialization, cognitive engagement to the extent that that mind can be cognitively engaged. And one of the big diseases, we attack one of the biggest diseases that affects this elderly population. It's called safety. Because that 85-year-old with dementia is one fall away from a cascade of healthcare issues that land that individual on the doorstep of the Brigham. And they become a very complicated, expensive, low margin to money losing proposition for the hospital. So we're trying to prevent that. And in the US, this is a private pay model. So people, our population, those 250,000 people that we're taking care of right now are paying out of pocket, and they're paying dearly for it, between $8,500 a month and $20,000 a month.
I think,
I would say the work that Tom is doing is one of the best partnerships that I could have. There's nothing that I think our care provider community wants more than for our patients, our individuals we care for, to be well outside of the traditional hospital.
Because by the way, a month in your place is a day in her place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a major reason,
Exactly.
major reason why.
but I think we should be talking about scalable models. I think we should talk about disruptions. And healthcare industry is very risk averse because of the issues of quality, safety. 10 years back, who would have thought Apple would be so keen on healthcare? So I think the disruption would come from outside of the industry because we think so conventionally. We still think about fall or dementia. We want somebody like them to come forward with new ideas, new technology, which could lead to disruption. And I think that's what we are all waiting for. Otherwise, we won't see a hospital of the future. I think after 10 years, we would still see Brigham only in the US or confined to Boston. But what we want is across the globe, a chain which can make things work, standardized protocols, clinical safety guidelines. We can reduce the cost for governments. That's a big issue right now because when we go to any governments, they're asking what is the value? What is that you can reduce the cost? So we need to answer.
All right, one more question, then I want to go to the audience for more questions. Each of you have a system that basically generates data. So you could say we're also involved in care and value care and helping people, but you're generating data. Historically, we've never used that data.
Yep.
Historically, that data is in, lots of trees that have been cut down and made into little pieces of paper. We now, through lots of convergences, have the ability potentially to use that data and actually to get better and to improve. And so what's your viewpoint? I mean, where do you think it's going to go? Are we really going to be, when you search on Google, your search today is better than your search yesterday.
Yep. when
we treat a patient, or I treat a patient, it's the same as it was decades ago.
I think it's a very big deal. Actually, just this morning, we crossed 13 million weight readings at Omada, longitudinally after 3 years. That makes us the biggest longitudinal data set of these programs in the world. And what I always say, especially in our space where most of the solid science is in person, you can't sit as a fly on the wall of every in-person program and use your insights quantitatively to make it better. So this is an area where we've invested quite heavily. We have a very robust data science team. Every single product initiative that we put has a paired data scientist that architects a product change as a real
So
as
what's
a
a data
randomized
scientist?
experiment.
What's their background?
Well, the person who leads our team was a particle physicist, right? Was at CERN looking for the boson, found the boson, called it a day. Like, well, what do I do next, right? Then was a radiation physicist for a while, and then, and then wanted to get out to the valley and explore this and that. Very atypical background for what we do, but that's who runs our data science team, and it's having massive, massive power because you don't put a program like this in the oven, set a timer, hear a ding, and call it a day. Like, you are always making sure that every single person in your program now is making the program better for tomorrow's join.
And they're all consented to data. I mean, that's obviously a complex issue.
Well, and
in
all
today's world.
that's right. And all analytics are done, anonymously. You don't need to kind of provide, individual level data in that when you make
So
the
nobody
product
knows who
changes.
the data scientist is. It's anonymous.
No.
But I think privacy is going to be a big issue. I think
It will be.
cyber security, we need to talk about encryption of these data. As you know, an electronic health record would cost more than 100 times of your credit card. So we need to be careful about standardizing, securitizing, the privacy should be maintained. So that's a good point to think about.
I would argue that the individual, health data belongs to the individual. I would challenge Sean and Sarah to think about how an individual who might have had an inpatient experience at my hospital goes to one of Tom's facility for extended care, travels to UAE and visits one of Shamsir's facility, and then touches both of your technologies. How is that person going to integrate all of that information in a way that if they touch another facility or touch one of us again, they've got all of that material?
We're a covered
accessible.
entity by the HIPAA law, which is the law that regulates data privacy and
So
security.
explain what that is again.
We treat our data as if we are a hospital. Our interpretation of HIPAA is that we are a covered entity, which actually allows for interplay and work between hospitals in totally new ways. And our licensure model is at the person level. Our participants own our data. We have a license to it because we need to use it, but that's where we put the licensure model.
Yeah, so I would just respond and say, I think for interactions with the kiosk that we intend to maintain, there's sort of optionality there. So if we're working within a hospital system, we would be providing the hospital system with that information, but there's still obviously a huge issue with, sort of universal EHR and also with PHR, right? So how do we build a
So
technology?
electronic health record.
And personal health record,
Got it.
yeah. So, in that environment, I think that becomes very difficult. In an environment like a community center, it's a totally different model, right? So how do you provide that information directly to the patient? And that's something that we're thinking a lot about.
So can the patient get their ultrasound now?
So you mean get their image?
Yeah.
So the image is less important than the diagnostic endpoint, right? And that's what we're trying to think a little bit about, with that virtual
Well,
pool
I mean,
of
what if I want to
providers.
take it to another doctor to look at it? What if I want to show?
That's true. That's true. We're on the earlier stage of things. More interested actually from a data perspective right now in how we create the best exam. And over time, we'll have to think a lot about where that exam is delivered. I think right now our focus is in the hospital environment, and so that's where we're going to be providing those images and looking to partner with hospitals that prioritize providing that data back to patients. But eventually, as we move into different spaces, I think that'll be important. The other thing I just wanted to mention is from a data perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunity to, like you were mentioning, improve the interaction and improve the treatment. So we are looking at ways to use data and artificial intelligence between patients to make that experience in getting an ultrasound, for example, quicker, more efficient, helping the remote physician better interact, to your point earlier, with the patient while they're doing the exam and not have to worry as much about the controls. And artificial intelligence solutions and data from previous patients will help us with doing that.
We need the data to drive outcomes. How do we know we're achieving a good outcome if we don't have good data? I live in a sector that has not used data historically, and we've just partnered with the Johns Hopkins Health System to establish data protocols around our resident population, because we know we are achieving fewer visits to the ER at Brigham and shorter length of stays when someone is admitted to a hospital bed. And we need the well-recognized data protocols so we can use this data and share this data. And so it's early days, but we're making an investment.
So, and I love that.
Drive.
But are you, in that data set you have, is it fragmented, or do you get the Brigham's data when a patient's admitted to the Brigham, they come back to you? Does that data go back to you and you get a more complete picture?
It probably not as efficiently as it should, and we're working towards that.
Yeah.
I think interoperability is a big thing right
Yeah.
now, because
I'm sorry.
interoperability of system, because your system doesn't talk to the system you have and doesn't talk to my system. So I think we need to standardize electronic health records, because in any hospital you'll see 10 or 12 systems working, and you go to an emergency room, you have a doctor who spends at least 60% of his time keying in the data on a EHR. It's very complex, and even in an outpatient room, the time is more. So I think we need more similar solutions, interoperable, where data is shared, and the ownership of the data is an issue. Who owns the data? It's the individual. So we need the consent of the individual to give them the best. So I think that's something that we should think about.
Yeah. One of the issues that was discussed this week and is being led by the World Economic Forum is beginning to standardize and set international measures of patient outcomes. And once that's done, that will go a very long way to helping achieve interoperability. Interoperability is certainly the technical components, but it's also standardizing the taxonomy, the language, the patient outcomes, and having shared sets of standards.
That's great. Well, let's go to the audience and let's see the interest in the audience. I see a hand but no face because you're there. Right? You've got one. We're going to bring you a microphone.
First, I have a thought and then a question
Sure.
for all of you, actually. So I represent the shareholder of the largest hospital chain in Asia. So we have hospitals in Singapore, Malaysia, Turkey, India, and China. And I've been building the chain over the last 10 years. So first, the thought is the general hospital isn't going away. All of the things that you guys described might happen. It might shrink, it might specialize, but it's not going away. The numbers we ran, particularly in our markets, is if you just look at the demand for healthcare, and you take every supply side disruptive force we discussed and apply it to the model, the demand for healthcare beds is still widening, not even shrinking. Yeah?
And that's because of aging of population?
Aging population, large populations, etc. The supply-demand mismatch is so big right now that there are people who are simply dying, not getting care. So, it'll increase. So God knows how those hospitals will get built. We'll do our best. So we'd love your reactions to that, particularly you guys.
I would like to take, because I'm from...
Let's just finish
and then the
the
question is, I have a question on the, all of this can be solved and hopefully will be solved with disruption from data, right? Defined broadly. You guys talked about a number of things. The question we can't get our minds around is who owns the risk? Because a lot of the technical issues around applying data to healthcare problems are just a matter of time. It's you get the right tools in place, supply the right people, the data collection, the interoperability, all these are solvable issues. The one we struggle with is who owns the risk. Because if you put the risk of self-treatment in the patient's hands, often they don't want to take it, and they're not even conscious of it. These are very complex issues. And particularly with esoteric treatments, more complexity is very, very hard. And unless we figure that out, where does the risk reside, the disruption won't happen.
It's a good one. Who wants to take it on?
So I can talk about the first part, which is the shortage of beds. So if you look at it regionally, if you take India, for example, the coming in of PE funds, that has changed the game. You see PE funds all around getting into the metro cities, but if you look around the tier 3, you don't see any activities going on. Yeah, that's the problem though. You know, there is a
Tier 3.
Tier 3, it's like the remotest of the smaller villages
Got it.
where there is no data, people don't have access to good quality care. So I think we need to change the model of payments. Now I think in India they're going to introduce the insurance schemes, which is going to be the biggest insurance company in the world. So we want to have access to care which is going to improve. And it's not just hospitals. We want primary care clinics, a quick reach to a doctor or a telemedicine facility. Building just hospitals is not the solution. We are going to add up to the cost. When you build a bed and somebody walks into a hospital, the cost is going to increase, and we have to address that issue.
That's right.
I would agree with you. I recently visited Cuba, which many of you know is about 11 million people, about the size of the state of Florida. And over the years, the Cuban government has invested in health and education so that every Cuban has a primary care doctor, a primary care center in the community. And they have health statistics which are comparable with the United States, which is quite remarkable. Their secondary and tertiary care system is not as developed, but they deliver incredible outcomes for the amount that they invest in their health system. That's a system where most of the care is delivered in the home, in the community, and not in a hospital setting. So I wonder, as access has improved in many regions of the world that historically has had poor access, whether alternate forms of, their care can be delivered through alternate structures and not just hospital beds.
And we see that interconnected network of whether it be, in my case, senior care, post-acute care, working with acute care, which will likely allow us to run acute care centers, perhaps with fewer beds, and more profitably, and deliver better outcomes that are flexible under a variety of reimbursement models.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at this purely from a business perspective, the adage is that if you invest in hospital structures and hospital beds, it's a heavy investment in capital and fixed structure. And then you've got to maintain that capitalization. Whereas if you invest in more flexible structures and really invest in the people and the technology who's going to deliver the care, that is being proposed as an alternate business model. So I would maybe challenge you to think about that. Yeah, I'm sure you do.
So, well, let's get to the second part of the question, because I think it's critical, is that, you know, we have this data, we're learning from it, sometimes machines are learning from it, and who's assuming the risk?
Yeah, I'd like to address that.
Sure.
So, you know, I think actually there's a lot of advantage to the fact that there is a fair amount of risk associated with data and AI integration into healthcare. And what I mean by that is that doesn't mean that the physicians aren't going away, right? So, you know, I think we talk to a lot of people who are concerned about the encroachment of robotics and AI on their acumen, on their training. And if we're not in a position right now from an industry standpoint, nor from a technology standpoint, to eliminate someone with that high, you know, sort of training and expertise. So, you know, when we think about the business model, for at least the foreseeable future, there will always be someone remotely interacting with a patient who has expertise, that's connected to a clinical network, that's respected and vetted, and that is the organization that's assuming the risk. And you see that even with teleradiology companies who aren't using robotics and aren't delivering care, you know, in time. They're reading images, and still there's someone remotely who's taking responsibility and has indemnity, you know, to make sure that that result is delivered in an appropriate manner and also is reliable.
There's a doctor.
What'd you say?
There's a doctor.
A doctor or a healthcare provider. You know, I think healthcare is very segmented, and we intend to continue to make use of that segmentation, largely so that we can make sure that providers are kind of provisioned as they're needed for the right patient at the right time. But it's that sort of physician or provider network that is responsible.
So it's more augmented decisions rather than...
Right, that's right. So our focus is on how do we use the technology that's available now to augment the capabilities and the acumen of physicians, and we spend a lot of time with physician networks educating them on the opportunity that these technologies present to increase quality of care, but not to replace their role.
Good, I still have a job, is what you're saying. Yes.
Hi, my name is Javier. I work in ophthalmology in Mexico. It takes 12 years of studying to do a cataract surgery in the average country, right? And one of the things that I've seen is that we really want to lower the cost, increase how many people reach, etc. And the big barrier is the secret sauce of all this idiosyncrasy of people that have come through the medical systems and don't want to use artificial intelligence, don't want to use many of the amazing things that are happening. So how do we need to shift our educational system for doctors to be wired for the future? Because it's not happening.
It's a great question.
I commend you, and I think you're absolutely right. When you think about your 12 years of training as an eye doctor to do cataract surgery, you had a number of tools available to you during the educational process. And you also had mentors and teachers who helped you learn how to use those tools. I think of medical education in the same way, except we're going to have an amazing new set of tools provided by these individuals and others. And we're going to need mentors and teachers who are facile in those tools. Mentors and teachers come in all shapes and sizes. It can certainly be the ophthalmologist who's been doing procedures for 15 years and is very experienced, knows the traditional secret sauce. But it can also be an individual who is well trained in artificial intelligence and knows how to use artificial intelligence embedded in your medical record system to help you make proper decision making about who are the best candidates for procedures, or for this particular individual, what's the best protocol, the best procedure, and the right set of medications to use. So I just think we have to get clever and be open to using all of the new tools and data sets going forward.
But there is a major historic lag between progress and between changing medical education to reflect that progress.
Yes.
It takes
And
time.
at the same time, it takes 13 years on average for 50% of docs to adopt a new technology. We are slow and
I think it'll start. I mean, I was talking with the dean of a medical school about how surprised that he was that the incoming class has incredible computer science skills. You know, so many medical school students are in, and they view.
And the dean has none, by the way.
That's right, you're right.
They like, instead of learning cursive growing up, they're like hacking on Python. Like that's, you know, and then what happens is you practice, you learn, you see clinical problems that all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I have a sense for how software can solve it, and I have appreciation how the tools will help me, and it's just going to take time. We just have to wait patiently.
Right, but I want to educate the dean as well as the students.
Well, the students
How
get
can you
upward
govern
management,
something
upward
that you've
management.
never seen or understood?
Yeah, there's an online
You're
Python.
absolutely right, David.
Andre.
Yeah, a great comments. I'm a practicing oncologist, and I have a question that applies across medicine. And I was wondering if you can comment on the ways we're going to move towards reimbursement. We're working towards bundled treatment, but as we expand this continuum of care inside and outside the hospital with very different levels of specialization in the hospital, that's one question. But also within a standard bundle, how we take into account the biological heterogeneity of patients to measure the outcome, and therefore adjust the reimbursement.
That's a complicated question,
Yeah,
multiple layers to that.
The answer is yes. Andre.
Yes. Well, let me just start by talking about financial risk. So the payment model, going from paying for volume under traditional fee-for-service to paying for value under paying for outcomes under a value-based system. At least in the United States, there is a slow and progressive movement towards value-based healthcare. There's a lot of geographic variation on how quickly that train is moving. Under the Affordable Care Act, we would say the train has left the station. Now, we don't know what repeal and replace is going to mean, but I do think...
I don't think they do either, but.
Well, no, that's probably true. But I think those health systems that have experience with moving towards value-based healthcare and global payments find that the care is so much better that the train has left the station.
I agree.
And I would include my health system in that.
And the only way to solve the insatiable demands for more beds without more beds is through a volume, value-based healthcare system. I mean, we've charged on outcomes from the beginning at Armada. We bill according to the percent weight loss we get the person to, using existing fee-for-service infrastructure. And we found our customers love it because they know the fees are always proportional to the impact we're having. It also is really interesting from a data side because to your second point, like how do you tailor and adjust based on demographics? And we can actually measure those. We can have, all right, here's the things that we know from data to matter to a person's success and kind of adjust populations, come up with expectations and targets.
I'll quote Mark Harrison, who leads Intermountain Health, and during the meetings this week, he told the story about how most of our health systems, we still are partially paid fee-for-service and partially paid global payments, but are moving to global payment and are delivering care as if we were all global payment. And Mark said that his board, Intermountain Health, has set goals around procedures. And their goal is to reduce the number of tonsillectomies by 50%. That they found their ear, nose, and throat docs were performing too many tonsillectomies. So in those areas where there's deviation away from benchmarks, you're going to see systems wanting to move.
But it's also segmenting patients. So, I mean, what you alluded to is that they're more complex patients and they're easier patients. They're patients who are known to have a worse outcome and not. And the better we can find great patients through technology, the better we're going to be able to do appropriate value-based care and really move the needle forward because we're all different.
But the value-based system promotes collaboration. So think about we care for people with Alzheimer's, very complex Alzheimer's that live with us. When they land in an acute care hospital bed, they are among the most, for an orthopedic issue, they're among the most complex cases for a hospital to manage. So we're establishing relationships between hospitals and our facilities to manage those individuals. And it's early days, but perhaps we'll be sharing in that bundle. We're a private pay model. We do not get reimbursement from Medicare, or in most cases there's very little private insurance. But we're moving in this direction.
I would say technology has a role to play in this also, and to your point about having to do more procedures than you need to, using technology to get better estimation of what the treatment plan should be, looking at people who had the same issues before, right? And then I would also say for repeatability. So in the ultrasound space, there are a ton of ultrasounds that are done again and again because the diagnostic endpoint can't be reached with the first image, right? And that's the case across imaging. So how do we use technology to enable value by using data analysis, using artificial intelligence to better interpret results?
I think you talked about oncology, which is very interesting because oncology in UAE is different from oncology in the States because the genetic setup is different. And we try at least 3 different combinations before we realize that it's working on the patient. So I think we need to be talking about precision medicine or personalized medicine. We need to be compounding DNA, mapping. So we need to reduce the wastage. So I think we need to come up with universal health records where we share intelligence and no longer anymore.
Share? What are you talking about?
We'll share the profits as well. So
Yes, in the back there. Wait for the microphone 1 sec because they're recording.
Hi, Sue Valeriot from San Francisco, and I appreciate your work with the older people, as I have 2 87-year-old parents who I play catching when my dog walks through and knocks them down. But on the other end of the spectrum at Brigham, the Brigham women, are they looking at technology, maybe moving women, the only healthy floor in the hospital, maternity OB, out, say with ultrasound and data from Mr. Duffy and throughout the trimesters, and then the risk involved that he brought up with moving them out of the hospital and home births? I don't even know. Is that a plan for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we used to deliver 10,000 babies a year. We now deliver about 6,000. And those 6,000 are primarily women at high risk and part of our maternal fetal medicine program. Many of the babies who are delivered end up in our neonatal intensive care unit. So we, in the tertiary center, it's referral risk, high risk, and sick babies. Our normal births have, by and large, been moved to our community hospitals. And whether anyone is interested in Call the Midwife, circa 2016. I'm referring to the PBS series on Call the Midwife.
Yes.
It's a charming program about midwifery in East London in the 1950s and 60s. Who knows? I would ask Atul. He has studied childbirth in India, in very rural provinces, and has shown that if you can institute a checklist of very simple parameters, that you can actually make childbirth much safer, even conducting at home.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't see back here. I apologize. Yes. Go ahead.
Deborah Estrin, Cornell Tech and O&M Health, which sort of gives away my line, which is that I know you all suffer from the silos that your major EHR providers gave you and makes it hard to do the interoperability. And we now, and you've all referred to the wonderful work that's coming along that you can do from data from the individuals. And Atul was talking to Collins about this yesterday in his interview, saying now we need a science of how to interpret these data. It's not going to come out an app at a time, and we can't leave it to Omada to have to invent every digital biomarker that's going to work for them. So what can we do to have the mobile and the digital and the IoT delivery of that data contribute to science to give us something more like the internet and less like our siloed EHR systems?
I think we've all experienced here at the World Economic Forum the ability of the world community to come together to solve common problems. And I would suggest that this is a common problem that is worthy of the international community coming together to solve.
Data standards, data standards, data standards. You know, we all talk different words to describe things. So if you're calling a broken leg, you're calling it a fractured leg. No matter what technology you have, it's very hard to harmonize the data sets. There's 6 major ones that exist in the world. Some leadership has to go forward and just say, hey, we're doing this. And people will get upset, but the field will move forward. Yes. Oh.
Well,
Just throw it.
I'm Paul Hogan with Home Instead Senior Care, and obviously with the surge in the aging population, to me it seems as though the 2 most scalable assets we have are family and home. So you started the session out by imagining what the hospital would look like in 10 years. How do you imagine expanding a family's capacity to care? How do you imagine the home? What would it look like? What would be there to help you accomplish health care?
That's a really, really great question. I can only speak to an experience we've had over the past year where a group of our internists, fresh out of their medical training, have set up a home hospital program as actually a randomized study. And they took individuals who came into the emergency room with pneumonia, and they asked them to participate in this study, and they were randomized to receive care for their pneumonia in a traditional hospital or at home. And as part of the qualification for entering, they had to have a certain functional capacity, and they had to have a support system with certain functional capacity. So you standardize that across both groups. If you were in the hospital, you received the standard care, antibiotics, yada. If you were home, you were rounded by your internist in the morning, and accompanied would be a nurse practitioner or a PA. Essentially get the medication or whatever. A nurse or equivalent would come back every 8 hours, so that visit 3 times over the 24 hours. And the care was both for the individual and the family to help. The family has to be present to help instruct. And at the end of the randomization, the early results show that the time to feeling well again was shorter, that the patient-reported outcomes, the patient experience was much more favorable, the family's experience was much more favorable, and the cost was markedly reduced.
And the food was better.
And the food was better, yes.
On that positive note, we're ending the hour.
Yeah.
And I thank you all for participating. It's been a remarkable group of panelists. And I think the exciting thing in today's Davos, this is actually a positive session. I think we all had a positive outlook of what's going on, and certainly we need to bring it to that, some of the other disciplines. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.